Thank you very much for having me. I'm really, really happy to be here. I'm really happy to be in a room full of Wikipedian men and women. It makes me very, very happy. So basically what I'm going to say is, it turns out, amplifies a few things that Jan said. Sort of the shortest version of this, and it's not short, I'm sorry. The shortest version of it is, go Wikidata. But I want to talk about this in terms of what I think is a change in how we think about the future. Also, I want to point out, I'm not a professor. I'm a senior researcher at Harvard's Berkman Center for Internet and Society, and I co-direct a library innovation lab, which is a little software lab at Harvard. But they don't like it when you call yourself a professor and you're not. It's sort of not a good thing. So I am going to talk about the future. I am not going to predict the future because I don't have the slightest idea of what's going to happen. But it does seem to me that we're seeing the future reframed. There's a new set of metaphors used to help, by which we understand it. And I think you can see part of this, one place you see this very directly is in the idea, simply the idea of hackathons, that we can do what 15 years ago nobody would have considered reasonable, just as they would not have considered Wikipedia to be reasonable. Namely, you can bring together a set of developers, and over the course of a day or a weekend, they'll produce things that have actual value and that nobody had thought of before, as opposed to the normal way in which software projects are produced. Careful planning, responsibility, charts, and nope, turns out you put people into a room, you give them some interesting data, and they will create amazing things. And you also see this, I think, very clearly at Wikipedia, which is in many ways, not in all ways, but in many ways, I think, a model for how we are reframing the future. Because it turns out that once we have this reframing, we can see that what we have been doing is hacking the future. That is, we've been making the best of a bad situation by being very clever human beings. You can see this in the Swiss Army knife, a wonderful little tool. And it gets even more useful as you add more blades. So that's more useful than the previous one. And this one is more useful than that one. And therefore, this one is incredibly useful. This is surprisingly a real thing. This is the Weinberger 16999. It'll cost you 4,200 shekels. You can get it from Amazon. You can get overnight delivery if you are on Prime, if you really need to have this. And clearly, even though this is a real thing, it's not a useful thing. There are 87 blades. They claim these 87 blades have 141 different uses, and they cover everything. You can use it to clean your golf clubs, to do your fishing, to clip your cigar, and to center your gun sight. So this is an entire American lifestyle. It's all wrapped up into a single set of blades. And the fact is that this is only a collector's item. It's at best a joke because it's so functional. The way to see this is to consider if we had the Star Trek replicators where you can say, so there are a ton of American references in this. I'm very sorry, but I'm assuming Star Trek is no longer an American reference. And if I'm wrong, if I apologize if I'm wrong. So you know the replicator, you tell it what it wants and it automatically makes it. So let's say you wanted a 1.5 millimeter Phillips head screwdriver, and it makes it. If it also added a pair of pliers, because that's always useful, and a chainsaw, you would call the replicator repair person. This would be a mistake, but that's exactly what the Swiss Army knife does. We have to go the Swiss Army knife route because physics sucks. Physics is really hard, and so we don't have the luxury of ordering what we want from the replicator. We have to anticipate what it is we're going to need, or the creators of the knife have to, and so they bundle together a set of blades that they anticipate we will be using. That's hacking the future. Many of these blades we may not ever use, but we have them because we had to make a decision and somebody did, because that's how the future has worked. This is a very ancient, prehistoric way of thinking about the future, and for good reason. It works. I'm not saying we're going to get rid of it. I'm just pointing out this is something we have assumed, that the way that it works is we have a need, we project a need, we're going to need a spear, and then we act towards the future. We build the spear, and then we hold on to that spear for as long as we possibly can so we can extract maximum value from it. So we anticipate our needs, we build what we need, and then we get value by maintaining it. And that's the way that we've lived in the future, a completely sensible way of doing it. So that's the first characteristic of the traditional future I want to point to. And the second, so it's anticipatory. By the way, I don't speak Hebrew, and I apologize for speaking English, but I don't have much choice. Sorry. And if I'm going too fast, which I do all the time, just, look really, really bored. Or stand up and leave. That would both be good indications. So anticipation is the first of the ways that we have thought about the future. And a second way is that we have viewed the future as a landscape that we are moving through, that we are driving towards. And as that landscape becomes closer, it becomes narrower. The possibilities become narrower and narrower. The further out, the more is possible. The closer in, less and less. So the future has had this shape of requiring us to anticipate and then narrowing. And these two features are, of course, related. We have to anticipate because we have to narrow. We just can't manage everything. So we have to narrow our possibilities, and we do so by anticipating. And we do this whether we're designing a knife or we're deciding what to put on grocery shelves. We are anticipating what people will need, or we're deciding what to put on library shelves. And I'm going to refer back to libraries because it's what I've been involved with for the past 5 years, also not unrelated to Wikipedia. So same action. We have to narrow, and so we engage in the thoughtful activity of anticipating what we or our users are going to need. Now, it turns out that knowledge in the West, and again, I appreciate Jan's reminding us that Wikipedia, like everything else, exists, serves distinct cultures, and these cultures don't always agree. That's what makes them cultures, the fact of their difference and disagreement. So our Western concept of knowledge has also had those properties of anticipating and narrowing. So from the very beginning in the West, knowledge has been understood as distinct from mere opinion. And so it already is a narrowing, a putting through a filter. All of our beliefs and what comes out the other end, that's knowledge. So it's always been reductive in that sense. It's been a matter of filtering. Second of all, knowledge has been about dividing the world, which is a way of narrowing it, dividing it into domains and disciplines and topics that we can master, that we can, in terms of our career or in terms of writing an article. So we've always had this idea of knowledge divvying up, dividing up the world. And the third thing, there's obviously much more to say about this, but the third thing to say about Western knowledge in this regard is that it has also anticipated by defining the order in which things are to be put together. And that's less obvious now in the postmodern world. It was completely obvious in the West before that, where to know what something was, it was to understand its single place. It has one place in the grand order of nature, in the order of things. And to know what a thing is to know its single place. Now, it turns out all of these properties are also properties of the physical manifestation of knowledge, primarily in paper-based books. And it's no accident at all that knowledge has taken on the properties of its paper-based medium. That you can't publish everything that comes to a book publisher. You have to narrow it, or to a magazine, a journal. So it's filtered. It has to be divided in the way that works in a library are divided, and ordered the way works in a library are, and likewise the way they're divided and ordered in a university curriculum that allows people to become experts within a limited domain. Now, of course, we have a new medium for knowledge. And we should not be surprised that knowledge is taking on the properties of that new medium just as it took on the properties of its old medium. Knowledge is becoming networked. And I'm going to come back to knowledge throughout this, but I want to take a look at, so this is a library. The middle thing is a representation of the library's presence on the web, which typically is what we call a portal. It's where you go, you're all familiar with these, you go, you read about the library, you're able to browse the contents of the library to some extent. It's the library's web page. The library obviously has a set of readers, and it has on top and a set of data underneath. once libraries are online, we can begin to change this. We are able to engage in the building of a platform, not simply a portal. And by a platform, an open platform, I'm going to use the term very loosely, but basically what I mean is that you can take the data, you can open it up. Now, you can't open all of it up because there are copyright laws that are very poorly formulated, but they're there. You can open up a whole lot of it, and you can bring in a whole lot of it as well. Anonymized usage data and user reviews and notes and annotations and bibliographic information and everything else you can think of. So you can start to make all of this data available. This is if you're going to pursue a platform approach. And then you put in the platform which has an API. So I am told that you are a hybrid group. So I'm not sure. So just as a show of hands to give me a sense of where you are. How many of you already know what APIs are and don't need any further explanation? Okay, so that's about half. I'll be really, really brief because this is not a technical talk. An API is a piece of software that allows other applications that are written to access this data as if this data were there. So this platform thing up here, I probably have the laser pointer, can't find it. So this thing up here, that portal, it's accessing the library's data, of course. And it can do so because the library has created it. In an API world, that is, when there's a platform that has an API, anybody can write an application, a piece of software that uses that data as if that data were theirs. And so you have people who will write all sorts of applications based on using this data. So maybe somebody will write an piece of annotation software, or somebody lets you create new collections and lists of things, or library analytics, or a recommendation engine, or a new way of browsing the contents of the library, or mash it up with something else, or games, or whatever. And the whatever is a really important part, because the whole reason to have this API is so that you can't predict what people will build. You know what your users want. You're the library. You know what they want. You built that. That's great. That's wonderful. But you cannot know, you cannot anticipate what other people are going to want to do with your data. And that is the main value of conceiving of your library, in this case, as a platform and providing an API. So that all of your users and people who are not your users can get value from your data. That is, get more value from your data.
I'm just worried.
Okay, so apparently I could not be heard. Shall I start again? I can do it. Don't make me do it. Actually, I could do a lot better. Okay. I'm sorry. This is what I'm trying to say. Okay. So your users around the world, and maybe if you're lucky, a user like Aaron Swartz, who I like to remember and honor as a pioneer, will build something. And Aaron, who many of you will have known, was building incredible things. That's what we want to have happen. That means that you get more and more value from your data because other people are building it. This also means that, I'm going to stick with libraries for one moment, that the future of libraries is unlikely to be built by librarians. It's much more likely to be built by Aaron Swartz and all the Aaron Swartzes in the world who have better ideas about what to do with this material. And that's a really, really good thing. It opens up this data to the world. So there are that's a typical sort of platform architecture. There are many, many platforms around. It's a very popular thing to do. Facebook in 2007 turned itself into a platform for developers so they could write stuff that would increase the value of Facebook's offerings. So Facebook is a platform. LinkedIn is a platform. The New York Times has a fantastic set of APIs. The World Bank has tons of information about developing countries' economies. Europeana is an amazing platform. DPLA as well, sort of the American version of Europeana. What's going on in the games world is astounding in terms of opening up games and game content as platforms. And governments as well. This is the data.gov in the US where our data is being made available to us. And this is a plug, this is a product placement. The little lab that I mentioned that I co-direct has a library platform called librarycloud.harvard.edu It's, of course, an open source project, and I'm encouraging you to take a look. And just by way of illustration, the basic idea behind it is that it brings in data from all the different things that feed into the Harvard Library. Harvard Library is gigantic. It's 13 million items, so there's lots of different data sources. It normalizes it so the stuff can talk together. It enriches it so that the data gets better, and then it makes it available through a variety of mechanisms, some of which are APIs, but some of which aren't, so that applications can be built on top of it. So I've been talking about platforms as a way of moving beyond a future that we have to anticipate, and a future that gets narrower in its possibilities, because platforms blow open possibilities. But I don't want to emphasize platforms too much. This sort of approach is visible in lots of different layers and levels and types of things. What's crucial from my point of view is that whether it's a platform or it's a protocol or a standard, that it does some of these things and some other things as well. That is that, well, I'm not going to go through them because I'm going to go through them one by one, except only the first three. I'm focusing on the first three because Wikipedia is really, really good at the bottom three, so there's not much to talk about. So now I want to talk about each of these, starting with including everything. So in the old world, the way that it worked was people sent their manuscripts to a publisher. The publisher looked through them, accepted a tiny percentage of them, and the rest of those manuscripts were now invisible. They were inaccessible. If you wouldn't ever know that they existed, and if you did, you'd have to actually track down the author to find it. These were just not available, and so all of that was lost. Now we still filter. We absolutely still filter on the web, but the nature of the filtering itself is different, because we used to filter out, and so you couldn't get at the stuff. Now we just filter forward, so that all of those books, all of those manuscripts are likely now, these days, to be posted. Even if they don't get published by a mainstream publisher, they're likely going to show up somewhere on the web. Somebody's going to post them where they will always be available. And when we filter now, you may be very interested in one of them. Let's say that one there, and you link to it, and you publish your link wherever, your blog, Facebook, in an email. All that you're doing in that sort of filtering is reducing the number of clicks that it takes somebody to get to that item. All they have to do is go like this, and they'll get to it. But the other stuff that you didn't link to, that's all available too, and it will show up in the next Google search or the next email or the next Twitter tweet or whatever. So we now filter forward, not out, which is a really remarkable and amazing and helpful thing. So there's an argument to say, and a strategy that I think is increasingly being adopted, which is include everything. And that's, of course, an overstatement, but I'm going to leave it for the moment. Include everything, and then give people tools so they can filter on the way out, rather than filtering on the way in. And Wikimedia is a good example of include everything. Now, it doesn't include everything. There are guidelines and rules for what you can include, but it has an inclusive mentality, and it includes a whole heck of a lot, and then gives you tools so you can find and filter on the way out. Now, I understand that there has been an argument at Wikipedia since 2000 and, well, mid-2000s, let's say, between the deletionists and the inclusionists. Raise your hand if this is just old territory. You familiar with this? Again, probably about the same half, I'm going to guess. Okay, so I will, again, try to be as brief as I can. And if I get it wrong, correct me. Okay? So the inclusionist argument says, no, when in doubt, include it. Include everything. Now, nobody really thinks it should include everything, but be broader, much broader in the range of things that you include. The range, what it means to be notable, for example. Make that a much lower bar. Deletionists say, well, no, we're trying to be the world's best encyclopedia, and an encyclopedia is not the web. It's not everything. It's a set of stuff that has particular value and is also obviously expressed in ways that are encyclopedic. There we go. So there's a continuum between thinking of Wikipedia as an encyclopedia and then thinking, well, no, I mean, it's the web. Anybody can post anything. So somewhere in between there. There is also a group called the delusionists. The delusionists believe that you can do both. They have their own wiki to argue this. I'm going to ignore them for the moment, although it's an interesting argument and you have to love the name. So you probably can guess from what I've said that I tend towards the inclusionist side, since I said include everything, that sort of definition. And I hesitate to weigh in because I am not a Wikipedian. I'm an occasional contributor, but I'm going to. So one reason to tend towards inclusionism is that there's no site without perspective. All site occurs from some perspective, which means that neutral point of view is a point of view, and that there will always be errors and errors introduced by the unnoticed perspectives that we all bring to whatever we see. Having an inclusionist point of view can help get past. You can't ever end that problem. This is a human problem, but you can ameliorate it. You can lessen it by including more. So that's one argument in favor of it. You can see this, in fact, in the Wikipedia logo, which had to make decisions about what to include. And it included a relatively small range, because there's not that much room on the ball, on the sphere. So it included a relatively small, quite small range of languages. Hebrew made it. Tibetan barely made it. The Canadian Aboriginal syllabics did not, as did thousands of other languages. They can't. That's the problem with filtering, with having a I just became totally inarticulate. That's the problem with filtering heavily. In a logo, you have to do, but it is an issue. Now, I do understand the deletionist argument that we don't really perhaps need to give a Wikipedia page to every piece of pasta that lives in the world, or to every type of pistol, or to every type of piston. Now, there probably are pages for each of them. Say that again, please?
Do they call themselves delusionists?
The delusionists have given themselves that name.
Yes.
Yes. So there is a wiki for the delusionists. You can look it up in Wikipedia. So I was not making fun of them. I enjoy the delusionist self-deprecation and sense of humor and perspective on themselves, which I think is actually really important in Wikipedia, and I'm going to talk about in a minute or two. So I understand the deletionist point of view, and it's an important one. So I'm not actually saying include everything. Everybody, all 7 billion people should get their own Wikipedia page. I'd listen to an argument about that, but it's not obvious to me that that's the case. So I want to give 3 reasons, nevertheless, to tend towards inclusionism. The first is that we can't predict history. So this is a horrible example, by the way. I apologize in advance. But this is an obscure catalog from 1963. You could do some home shopping before the internet. And if this was the Sears Roebuck catalog, very mainstream catalog in America. And if you page through it in 1963, that gun that's circled there, yes, because we sell guns through catalogs, even in 1963, you would not think there's anything special about this, and you would not include it in any, you wouldn't include it anywhere except in this catalog. It's not interesting or important until it turns out that this particular gun is the one that was ordered by the guy who killed John Kennedy, and that's the gun in his hand right there, Lee Harvey Oswald, at which point suddenly, looking backwards, this became a really important historical artifact. But we can't predict history. So that's an argument for including when we can. The second is that we don't know what's going to be useful to people. So this is the 1940 telephone book from New York City. Obviously just one page from it. By itself, it seems like the sort of thing you absolutely should throw out. If it's in your house and you are keeping these, there's something wrong with you. You are a hoarder. You need to learn how to use a trash bin. Nevertheless, the New York Public Library, which has a library lab that is in many ways a sibling of ours, we feel very attached to them. They're an amazing set of developers. They digitized the 1940 telephone directory. They turned it into recognizable objects, and they semanticized it. And this turns into an incredible resource. The history of those phone books can be a history of the movement of immigrant populations through New York. It's an incredible artifact. Nobody thought it was an incredible artifact in 1940. They thought it was just a good way to look up numbers. So we can't tell, because they hadn't anticipated digitization and computers and all the rest of it. We cannot tell what's going to be interesting. That's a reason to be inclusive. And a third reason to be inclusive is we can't tell what's going to be interesting to people. We cannot anticipate people's interests. Especially at a Wikimedia conference, you all know that people are interested in the most bizarre, weirdest set of things, all of which helps make Wikipedia into the treasure that it is. So if you were curating a collection of information about news, you very likely, that's a bad picture of Britney Spears. She's an American singer of little note, but very, was famous, still is. Anyway, you would not include gossip about Britney Spears in your news aggregation, because it's gossip, it's trivial, it's the definition of trivia. It's like the Kardashians now. Do you know the Kardashians? Yes. I'm really sorry you know the Kardashians. I was hoping you wouldn't, but there you go. But if you did the right thing, so to speak, of excluding the gossip from your news catalog, your news aggregation, you would also thereby unintentionally be depriving academics of primary research materials. There are academics who study the effect of the media on female celebrities. It's, in fact, a pretty interesting and vibrant field. Here are just some of the articles. This one is media coverage of celebrity driving under the influence, drunk driving. Teachable moments or problematic social modeling. We would have lost that if we didn't have the gossip available to us. We cannot predict what is interesting to humans. That is a characteristic of our species. And that's a reason to prefer inclusionism, from my point of view. So those are three reasons for moving towards greater inclusion. Unfortunately, I don't even pretend to have settled the argument. That's a really important and good argument to have. Okay, second point is making things, if you're going to take a platform approach to the future, then you want to make as much possible machine addressable. That is, you want machines, computers, to be able to find and make sense of and put together what is in your platform. So you can see why I'm heading now towards Wikidata. So Wikipedia obviously has an API. Wikimedia Commons has an API. That's wonderful. Wikipedia, in terms of structuring its data, has not been great, although it's been making great strides. Wikidata. One of the ways that it's been doing it in a way that mixes human readability with machine readability is to start structuring the info boxes as well. I have 10 minutes. Thank you. So the info boxes try to pull together what's most important and interesting, and machines can go through those and find what's there. But there's a problem with it, as I think is well known, in anticipating what's going to be important enough to make it into the info box. So at our lab, where we have this library cloud project, we have a schema. That is, when we bring in metadata, we expect, it's like an info box. We're interested in some elements, and so we give them names, and then we fill up the names with the values. So this is part of the schema. A couple months ago, the Tibetan Buddhist Research Center, which is near Harvard, came in and said they'd like to give us metadata about 10 million Tibetan documents to put into Library Cloud. And we said, great, and we had the conversation. Or more than great, we're thrilled. We had the conversation to see how their metadata matched up with ours, which it did pretty cleanly, because their documents have authors, and ours metadata schema expects authors and dates and the like. But there's one piece of information that was really important to them that we had not had in our schema, which is, who is the author or reincarnation of? We had not anticipated that that would be crucial information. Now, we were able to sort of hack and handle it, that's fine. But it's a problem with data, with having to anticipate. And one can wonder whether, at what point Wikipedia may decide that it needs in the information boxes to have a reincarnation of tag. So DBpedia, which many of you know, has taken us a long way towards being able to address the information in Wikipedia as if it were a database. Have machines address and find the information in Wikipedia. And lots of wonderful projects depend upon DBpedia. Wikidata is going to make this even better. It is so crucial to extracting the value that is in Wikipedia so that it can be used in new ways and thus become more valuable, and also address the problem that Jan pointed to, namely that different cultures and different people are going to want to use this information differently. Nobody can anticipate how people are going to want to use this information. So in our lab, we wanted to know for a project how many books have an article in Wikipedia about that book, just about that book. So it's not that the book is mentioned somewhere, but there's an article about it. If you go to DBpedia, you'll find about 15,000. We thought there were more. We engaged in an experiment to try to do this. The experiment found maybe 50,000 order of magnitude, but it was really messy and unclean and difficult. So here's part of the problem. Here's Ulysses, the article about Ulysses, the book. It has a set of categories, as is typical of articles. The categories are, I'm going to go through this very quickly. You can just have to believe me. The categories are a huge, stinking mess. And it may be better in the Israeli version. In English, it's terrible. So here are the categories for Ulysses. Pretend you're a computer. You're trying to answer the question, is this a book? I just want to know, is this a book? So you start clicking as a computer. You click on adultery in novels. You could have started anywhere else. This is an example. You go to, that leads you to, adultery in novels is, itself is a category of two others. Fields, adultery in fiction, sexuality novels. You click on sexuality novels, you get to sexuality in fiction. You click on that, you get to fiction by topic. You get to fiction, and then on the fiction page, there are 3 references to books. You choose fiction books. So we're trying to find out, is Ulysses a book? You get taken to the fiction book page. There are 10 entries. None of them tell you this is a book. They are weird categories that range from sensible things like children's fiction books to just bizarre fiction books about the Central Intelligence Agency is one of the 10 subcategories. This makes no sense. A librarian would not have constructed it this way. And as a result, you cannot find out if Ulysses is a book. It's a pretty basic thing. And there's a really easy way to fix this, which is to let the category books be a category in Ulysses. But, at least in English, you are not allowed to have within the category list for any item, any categories that are above the categories, the lowest level categories. This violates, at least it used to, I think it still does, violates the rules for building categories. As a result, Wikipedia, am I wrong? Okay, I'm sorry. I'm more sorry about that than that you know about the Kardashians. So as a result, Wikipedia takes the process of categorization, top-down set of categories, and the process of tagging, bottom-up, unrestricted tagging by users, smushes them together and comes up with the worst of each, the problems of each. It's as chaotic as tagging and as incomplete as categorization. It's not a good system. And it's frustrating for users. It's also deadly for computers. So that's something that maybe could be worked on. Third is adding value. And this is something that obviously Wikipedians know all about, because you are all about the incremental improvement of articles through small changes, whatever language you're in. And this is, we can see the revision history, and they are magnificent tracks of small changes made by generous human beings who are doing this not because they're paid, at least generally not yet. I don't want to get involved. But this, yeah, too late. But this leads to another crucial way that Wikipedia is changing knowledge itself. So this is, if you looked in the 1911 Encyclopedia Britannica, the great English language encyclopedia, for the Oliver Goldsmith, English poet, article, you'd find an article with 6,000 words. If you looked again in 1961, 3,000 words, looked again in 1994, 1,500 words. So with every edition, Britannica throws out information. And it's not happy about it, but it has to do that because it's a physical object with only so much space. It is throwing out. This is what and it's not Britannica alone. It's Our culture consistently has thrown out information because there wasn't enough room for it. This is sort of a cultural tragedy, which Wikipedia obviously gets past. The Goldsmith article is only 1,400 words, but it's got so many links that it ultimately has more words. But the point is that in order to do the comparison, how much does Wikipedia have about Goldsmith? It's easy in the Britannica. You just count the words in the article. Here you have to decide which links you're going to count. You're probably going to count the ones about his novels, but are you going to count the ones about his hometown or about other novelists and the like? I don't know. There's no good answer to this, because it turns out that once we're freed of paper, topics like Oliver Goldsmith turns out to be a web, not an article. It's a loosely linked set of ideas, and it's up to us to decide where the boundaries are. In fact, this is true, obviously, on the web itself, where topics are webs of things that are connected. And these connections are connections of disagreement and difference, shadings of meaning. The knowledge is in the complete web of them, is in this incomplete and unsettled environment. Now, this raises a difficult issue, because I want to argue that knowledge on the web has been changing so that it includes difference and disagreement, and is unsettled, which is very different from our traditional idea of knowledge, and is very different from the process Wikipedia uses in order to produce neutral pages, pages about which we no longer argue, which is obviously an incredibly valuable thing to do. So on the one hand, we have a web that's changing knowledge so that it's unsettled. On the other, we have Wikipedia standard reference, which shows us the settled knowledge, what we have agreed upon. At least those of us who agree upon it have agreed upon it. There is something, so that's great. The one thing that causes me pause is, if you go to the talk page, you see this wonderful, I'm doing the best I can. You see this wonderful set of arguments among people who are engaged in the process of coming up with a neutral point of view, of coming up with a page. And as people in this room know, but precious few people outside of this room know, those talk pages are an incredible learning tool, an amazing tool in which we can see the real advantage of Wikipedia in its presentation of settled knowledge, which is it's settled, but we can see the process, the human process by which it was settled. We can see the arguments on the talk page. We can see the revision history, things that Britannica never showed us. It's that human process that gives Wikipedia its authority. It's why we can trust it. It's why we do trust it. We know that it was written by humans and just by humans, and humans get everything wrong. And here we have a process that moves knowledge forward towards settlement. So this is for the talk page. This is the collection of talk pages about this article, which far longer than the article itself. If there were some way to make, since most people don't click on the talk page and don't know what it is, if there were some way of making it apparent to the casual reader that in fact every word, every sentence in here has likely been debated by knowledgeable people and who have come to agreement across their differences, then the humanity of Wikipedia would be clearer. It would be, and I believe, be even more trustworthy. This is a stupid example. Imagine if there were a marker that said there was an argument about whether it's a theory of evolution. Click on it and see the stuff from the talk page. Almost done. So I'm skipping these because these are things that Wikipedia just does wonderfully well. But it's not enough, I think, to just do those 6 sorts of things, include everything and so forth. To be an open platform, to change the way we think about the future, you also have to embody a set of values. Being open and supporting standards and modeling trust and enabling small participation and a culture of sharing and a culture of standing for something, all of which Wikipedia does incredibly and is a model for us, a model of how we can get along peacefully in a world in which we really don't agree. So we're not going to give up on anticipating. Of course, we're going to continue to anticipate our needs and act prudently to take care of them. We have to. And we're not even going to, I don't think, going to give up on the idea that the future in some way is a territory that narrows out as it gets closer. But this is we are, I think, on the verge of a new metaphor, one that looks a lot like a platform in which the possibilities multiply as they come closer. There's more and more that we can do, but we can only do it together. We only get value out of platforms if we open them up to the largest variety of people, the largest number and the largest and most diverse variety, and insofar as we can interoperate with all the other platforms that are emerging, which is something that Wikidata is going to help, and Wikipedia serves as a model for. Thank you.